What's the nature of your emergency?
Good morning, police, fire, military, and families, and to everybody who is listening in on the Tactical Living podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Walton, joined this morning by my new friend, Mr. Charles Smith. Charles, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ashley. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. You're in Massachusetts, and I just had this discussion with my husband last week because we were watching a documentary on an investigation that was done in Massachusetts, and he insists that you say Massachusetts. So can you please give us the correct enunciation for the name of your state?
Well, as long as I've lived here, which is most of my life, it's been Massachusetts.
T, right?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you. I feel vindicated this morning. So this is going to go well already.
Just don't send your husband after me.
So, Charles, we're going to get into some of your background and what you're doing now. But to everybody who is tuning in, if you have ever been diagnosed as somebody with PTSD, whether it's self-diagnosed or professionally diagnosed, I want you to stick around and listen to today's episode because Charles is going to talk to us about C-PTSD, which is not something that most people talk about. And yet it's something that I believe that anybody in our community actually should be diagnosed with instead of PTSD. So stick around. And then we are going to be giving away a tank made out of bullets. And whoever comments the most within the next 24 hours, I will send that your way. So if you have any questions for us along the way, if you want to banter, make fun of me, make fun of Charles, we're all family here. So go ahead and put all those comments down in the comment box. Now, Charles, the way that I want to start this out, if it's okay with you, is you said something. So I pulled a quote from your website. And what you said was that I felt like the world owed me for my loss. And I sat there and I reread that several times. And it was so profound to me after reading your bio. So can you just take us a little bit back into your past and tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I was orphaned by the time I was 11 years old. My mother passed away of addiction, pills and alcohol when I was 6. And then my father moved me and my sister around all over the country, Texas, Arizona, Connecticut, different parts of Massachusetts. It's all in my book, 10 Homes in 11 Years. And then he passed away when I was 11. And I still remember that morning specifically like it was yesterday. I woke up and I could see him outside of our bedroom. Me and my father shared a bedroom. We were dirt poor at the time. And I had an eerie feeling come over me when I seen my father. And I went over to him, I hugged him, and I said, "Dad, I want to stay home from school." And he told me I can't because I already missed a lot of school. I stayed back in the 2nd grade. And I went in the bathroom, I shoved my finger down my throat. And long story short, he passed away on me, or he passed out on me twice that day. The second time he passed out on me was at home. And I went over my neighbor's house, grabbed her, and then we rushed him to the hospital, and he died when I was holding his hand. And yeah, that's why I felt the world owed me one. But now I feel like I owe the world, just for being here. It's weird how things go because, like, I was homeless 20 years ago, and that was my crucible. I felt it was the worst time of my life when I was back there, but now I look at it now, and like that was the most profound time of my life because it changed my life seeing other veterans and my brothers, you know, hopeless too, and realizing that I'm not the only one.
Yeah, and something that's coming up for me right now is that most kids at the age between 3 and 11, they're thinking that the world owes them something because their parent took away their iPad, right? And you went through something that most kids will have never have had to have gone through as a child, and I can't imagine what that was like. So after your dad passed away, then what happened?
After my father passed away, my grandfather caught wind of it from Massachusetts up here, and I try to keep it light.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And you know, he sent my uncle down to get us, and we were being taken care of by my sister's best friend back then for a couple of days, and my uncle came to get us, and my uncle and the state were in the restaurant that we were in at the same time. The state was ready to get us, bring us into foster care, and then my uncle came and like, nope, they're coming with us or with me, and give him the paperwork, and they let us go with my uncle. But we were that close to being taken into foster care.
So what was the journey then from going under their care rather to you joining Army Basic?
It was my friends were like my family, because at that time I pushed away any biological family. And now that I've talked about it over a million times, I come to believe that I just didn't want anyone taking my father or my mother's place. And anyone that did, I felt resentment towards, and so my friends turned into my family, and we did stuff that teenagers do, and growing up and all that. Drinking and partying, and I got into harder drugs while my friends didn't. Um, I also failed my way through high school because I really didn't care. And when I went into the military, I was pretty bad off with crack cocaine, and drinking not so much, but the crack cocaine was like my drug of choice. And so my aunt told me to get out, get a job, and don't come back. And I went out. I went to the recruiter station. I joined the military. I came back. I said I'll be gone in a month.
Now, I know on your bio, you talk a lot about some things that had taken place. I couldn't distinguish if it was during the time or after you had gotten out. So talk us a little bit through what I want to know is the process between where that story just stopped and where you learned what C-PTSD is completely.
Okay. Well, in the military, I had a couple triggers. One was a Bradley explosion that I was in. We were in California, actually, at the National Training Center, and we were firing our Bradley downrange, and we fired one round, and then we fired another round, and all I remember seeing is the turret flying off the tank, and the tank making a louder noise than I've ever heard in my life, filling up with smoke. And then the bystanders told me that I got out of my tank after I released the back of it, got out of my tank, got my crew out, which were burned and blinded by the explosion. And then I just sat there, and that's one of my triggers is loud noises and tight spaces and that. Um, and then I was in Cuba for 6 months, and that turned into another trigger because I was in a lot of riots when I was in Cuba. We had Cubans and Haitians in camps in '95. They were trying to transition from the United States or from their countries to the United States. And we couldn't just let them come over, so we had them stay in camps, and let's just say they didn't like that much. So they decided to riot a lot. So I think I know what you're talking about with the timeline. After the military, my uncle and my grandfather died about a month apart in 2000, and they both died of cancer. And oh, I'm back. Did I miss? Okay.
You're good.
Okay. So yeah, that was one of the hardest times of my life. I was in a really dark depression, and I ended up cutting on myself with a razor blade just to feel something other than what I was feeling, which I now know to be more common than it really should be. And I ended up trying to take my own life because of all the depression, and everything was just coming to a head. Not to mention losing them turned out to be like losing my father all over again. And it was just so horrible. And then at that time, after I tried taking my life with a bottle of sleeping pills, my friends found me, and then I was rushed to the hospital, and then I became homeless because where I was living didn't want me back. I was living with some friends that didn't want me back because of what happened. And so once I was homeless and I found shelters, VA shelters, veteran shelters, I ended up going to the VA doctors, and they told me about PTSD. And that's where I found out that I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I had it all my life. I had it since I was 6 years old. And then I found out about compounded PTSD or complex PTSD. It's called both.
So for anybody who's not familiar with, what is the difference between somebody suffering from C-PTSD versus just PTSD?
PTSD is like one trigger. Like if you're in a firefight or you're in if you have a car accident or something like that, and you have hypervigilance, you have flashbacks, you have nightmares about it, then that is like one trigger. What compounded PTSD is, I look at it like a layer cake, kind of, because it's like my mother's death, my father's death, everything that happened between there. You'd have to read the book, but everything that happened between there, and then my uncle's death and my grandfather's death and the tank explosion, and the layer cake just keeps growing and growing and growing. And You see that a lot in first responders, because a lot of first responders experience a lot of different traumatic events and a lot of triggers, even if they don't realize it at the time. And a lot of us men, we try to hide it. We try to push it down. Where I personally know people that have lost their lives because they tried to push it down, and that's one reason why I come on these shows. Because I want to make sure that if somebody hears this, then they have a second thought. Hey, maybe I should get some help.
So going along those lines then, in my coaching practice, I like to explain the difference in the same way that you just did, where you may have a female who was raped as an example. And I like to use the metaphor of a Rubik's Cube. So that entire Rubik's Cube will have all black stickers on it. But in the essence of first responders or military members, the Rubik's Cube is colored in all these different colors, and that making up all the different incidents. And even worse than that, you try to put the pieces back together, but it's as though we're just scattering the shit out of everything and making it worse. So in your experience, what do you think has helped to make it feel better?
Coping skills, definitely. Meditation, yoga, that sort of thing. But that works for me. We all need to find our own coping skills. I have a book on addiction that it really goes into depth on coping skills and wellness, the eight dimensions of wellness, emotional, physical, all that.
I have a super personal question for you. What took you from the place of having all of these things having had happened to actually wanting to do something to learn how to develop those coping skills? What was that bridge for you?
I would say it was the homeless situation, but then now more than ever, it's my son. It's not just me anymore. He's 10 years old, and that brings me to something that I always tell people about my suicide attempt. I always tell people that was 20 years ago. My son is 10. You do the math. If I succeeded back then he wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be a 7-time author. I wouldn't have opened a inspirational shop just a couple days ago. It's got cups and all kinds of stuff on it. I wouldn't be here talking to Ashley. The what ifs and what could have happened. We just had somebody the other day walking on a bridge in Worcester or Worcester to Shrewsbury, and a friend of mine said that his sister seen the guy walking 1 minute, and then the next minute he was gone. And this bridge is like 30 feet high. The guy jumped the bridge. And the cops, she said that there was police boats there, like right on the spot, but they couldn't find the body. But that's why that's why I say that all the time in every podcast, because you never know, like that guy, you never know what could have happened in his life after the traumatic event or the depressed mood that he was in.
Yeah, you just you said something that really stuck out just now. You said depressed mood, and I've interviewed people who've been on that bridge before and who've taken that leap, and their very first thought, and maybe you've also heard of similar stories, is they wish that they hadn't done it almost instantly. So, permanence is really something that we need to consider. And I heard Charlie Kirk talking about this recently because somebody from his team committed suicide this year. And he said that we don't talk enough about the reasons why us committing suicide is so selfish. And I was like, wow, like that's a pretty blatant thing to say, right? But we don't. We feel, and from people I've talked to, it's just so self-consuming that all that we're thinking about is us without ever thinking about the fact that, as you just said, it could be a depressive mood. And we know that to be true from everybody who has healed from it and felt better eventually and developed and acclimated with the coping skills. And then there's the people around us, right? So I can't imagine the contrast. And I would guess that it's something you may reflect on often by knowing that, 20 minus 10, like there's a massive difference between what could take place, not only from 10 years ago, but from 10 years ago to now. You never know what life has in store for you if you end it early. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that because we're so fixated on the issue itself that it's difficult for us to, it's almost like spitting it out when you're speaking such truth in that way. And I think it is something that we need to express more and talk about more, which brings me to my final point with you, Charles, because you're doing a lot right now in terms of outreach and being able to help the community and help other people who may be able to relate to your stories. So before we end this, can you just tell us a little bit about some services that you provide, some books that you have written, and then how to get a hold of you?
Yeah. Well, I work right now for one of the most amazing addiction recovery programs that I've ever seen in my life called Aware Recovery Care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in multiple different states. We just opened up in Kentucky. It's in Florida. It's in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, and some other states that don't come to mind at the time. But what we are is we're an IHAT program, in-home addiction treatment. And we meet the people where they're at. And what I mean by that is, like today, I'm going out for Chinese food with a client. And we're going to talk about their recovery while we're having Chinese food. Yesterday, I had a graduation for a client. We went, the whole team, they have a team that works with them throughout the whole year. We have the client for a year, which I love because I worked in detoxes and stuff and never had enough time with the client. But now we have a whole year. But I went over to their house and we had pizza. For the graduation, that's what they wanted to do. Have pizza with the team. And it's just an amazing organization. So anyone in addiction, starting out in addiction recovery, look up awarerecoverycare.com.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And my books themselves, they can be found on lifelongexperience.net. And I have books ranging from PTSD. I just came out with a new edition of my Operation Tip book, Trauma Informed Program Plus. And this one is based more for first responders and military.
That was the one that was published in December, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to link that here too. The website, thank you for dropping that, lifelongexperience.net. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, if they have questions, they want to work with you, is that the best way to reach out to you?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Yep. Perfect. That's awesome.
And if there's any veterans programs listening, I have come out with a line for PTSD awareness for a line of like coffee cups and clothing and stuff. And I'm looking for someone to donate the money to, like donate a portion of the proceeds to.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So we'll go ahead and link all that down below. You'll request access to the group. So if anybody has any more questions, you can go ahead and drop them here, and then we'll make sure to tag you, Charles. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Charles, thank you so much. And thank you for clarifying the whole Massachusetts situation for me.
Massachusetts.
Thank you. Stick around here, Charles. Have a good day, everybody.
911, what's the nature of your emergency?